All right, let's talk about something we all kind of do. We see ourselves in the animal kingdom, right? The loyal dog, the sly fox, the busy bee. But what if we took that idea and really formalized it? Today, we're going to dive into a system that does exactly that. It's building a whole new language for how we think about human behavior.
I mean, really think about it for a second. Have you ever felt that hyper-awareness of a meerkat on watch, just constantly scanning everything? Or maybe the complete opposite, that relentless, focused persistence of a woodpecker, just hammering away at one thing. We reach for these metaphors for a reason, right? They just feel true. They nail a specific state of being that's sometimes hard to put into words.
So what if these aren't just clever metaphors? The whole idea we're digging into today is that these analogies can be, well, more than just poetic. There's a new system that actually maps these animal behaviors onto the DSM-5 framework. And if you're not familiar, that's basically the clinical manual for human psychology. So we're not talking about casual comparisons anymore. This is about building a real formal conceptual bridge. Okay, listen up, because this next part is maybe the single most important concept in this entire thing. The system calls these parallels a human differential prompt, and that's the key. This is not about saying, oh, you have squirrel disorder. No way! Think of it as a tool for thinking. It's a prompt, something to spark new questions and ideas about why a person might be behaving a certain way. It's all about starting a conversation, not slapping on a label. Okay, so how does this actually work, in practice? Let's get into the real meat of the system and check out some of the most powerful examples. We'll start with the stuff that's super intuitive, where the parallels just click.
Take a look at anxiety. What's so cool here is how it captures all these different flavors of anxiety. You've got the meerkat. It's not just about being on watch. It's that cooperative, rotating vigilance you see in a group. Then there's the rabbit, which perfectly shows that freeze-then-bolt cycle, that dash for safety. The squirrel, that's all about future-oriented anxiety, right? The constant gathering and preparing. And the hammerhead. I love this one. It's that broad, sweeping surveillance, always scanning for patterns in the chaos. Each one gives us a different lens on what it feels like to be anxious.
But what's really, really smart about this whole thing is that the system knows its own limits. It doesn't just pretend every single analogy is a perfect one-to-one fit. The people who built this actually rated every mapping on a scale from weak all the way to strong. And that, to me, shows some real scientific caution. They're being upfront about where the parallels are really solid and where they're, a bit more of a stretch. And here's a perfect illustration of that. On one side, you have trauma disorders. The source material says this is one of the strongest categories. And it makes sense, right? The animal kingdom is just packed with examples of hypervigilance, defensive activation, threat response. Think of a startled deer. But then on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have something like schizophrenia. And here, the system basically throws up a giant red flag. It calls this a very weak analog and is super clear that this is not about equating anything with psychosis. In fact, here is a direct quote from the source, and it really shows the intellectual honesty behind all this. It says, the mappings are highly provisional and are really only about things like distorted signaling or unusual perception ecology. And, this is the key part, not psychosis equivalence. It's not trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. It's being really careful. This leads us to something absolutely critical. We need to draw some very clear lines in the sand. Honestly, the boundaries of this system, what it is not, are maybe the most important part of this whole conversation. Understanding the limits is key to thinking about this responsibly.
So here are the hard and fast rules, straight from the source. Number 1, you are not diagnosing animals. A meerkat doesn't have GAD. Number 2, this is a tool for understanding humans, not animals. It's a prompt about us, not a label for them. Number 3, if a mapping is rated weak, you have to use it with extreme caution. And number 4, this is a huge one, a biological function in an animal is not the same thing as a complex human identity.
And here is probably the most powerful example of why that last rule matters so much. You probably heard people bring up the clownfish, right? How it can change sex? This system tackles that head-on and draws a very firm line. A clownfish changing sex is a biological process, a reproductive strategy, that is completely different from the complex human experience of gender dysphoria, which is about identity and the distress that can come with incongruence. The source actually uses the clownfish as a boundary example. It's there specifically to say, nope, this is not a direct analog for human identity. And here's another great example of that boundary. Think about a lion pride. They have a polygynous mating system. That's just an animal social structure. The system is crystal clear on this. You can't just take that and try to shoehorn it into a human DSM diagnosis. An animal's social system isn't a human pathology,
period.
All right, so if this isn't about slapping on labels, you might be asking, what's the point? Well, this brings us to what I think is the coolest part of this whole idea, reframing how we look at things, moving away from just disorders and towards adaptive patterns.
Check this out. This system has this amazing category called no diagnosis or adaptive pattern. And this is where we can use these animal parallels to talk about strengths, not challenges. Think about the crow with its incredible flexible learning and how it thrives in cities, or the otter with its curiosity and clever problem solving, or the elephant's memory-guided protection of the herd. These aren't problems. They're brilliant, powerful survival strategies. It's a language for talking about what makes us resilient.
So when you boil it all down, what's the crucial point? It's this. This whole thing is a language expander, not a label maker. Its job is to give us richer, more interesting ways to talk about what we go through. It's not a diagnosis machine. It's a prompt for thought, a way to get curious and see the same old patterns in a totally new way.
So I'll just leave you with this one last thought. You know how we talk about finding our spirit animal? Maybe that whole idea kind of misses the point. What if the real goal isn't to find the one animal that defines us, but to borrow from the entire animal kingdom, to find a better, more colorful, and maybe even more compassionate language to tell our own stories?